A few years ago, my friends and I created Enlightaid, a company with the goal of providing real-time transparency to the use of donations. And even though I will tell you why transparency is key if we ever have any hope of building a truly sustainable and inclusive global society, this talk is not entirely about that. Don't get me wrong. I love transparency so much, in fact, that I could be here in this stage talking about it the whole day. You would pretty much have to bring some guards to drag me out of the stage. But today, I'm using this opportunity to talk to you not only about what I do, but also to share why I do it. I was born in Chile, and as I'm sure many of you know, this is a beautiful country in the most southern part of Latin America, full of amazing contrasts and landscape. But our differences go beyond landscape. We are also one of the most unequal economies in the world, and in all certainty, the most unequal one in the OCDE. As I grew up, I had the opportunity to see many realities different than mine. I spent many years, basically all of my teenage years, in Argentina, and there too, I experienced this imaginary glass that separates people between them and us. This imaginary glass is poverty. Unfortunately, I grew up surrounded by poverty. It was normal to me to see people begging for food, children living in the streets. And the thing is, when you see it every day, it's really easy for you to detach from it when you want to. You kind of don't even see it. As the years went by, I returned to Chile, and I started university. I was studying to become an architect, and in my head, that unspoken dream of becoming the next Latina Zaha Hadid, of course, I always liked dreaming big. In my second year of university, two things happened. They were pretty major, I must admit. On one side, my parents returned to Chile, and they created their own company. And on the second hand, the penguin revolution started. And I am really sorry that I have to disappoint you, but the penguin revolution has nothing to do with these cute little birds I have behind me, but it has everything to do with education. In 2006, high school students began a revolution. They were protesting against my country's educational system. They were advocating for access to free and quality education. And soon, we university students joined the movement again. For the first time in my life, I reflected over the fact that education did not seem to be for everyone in my home country. This became really confusing, actually. In parallel, my family was walking into a crisis of our own. And it was not long after that my parents' company went bankrupt. My family lost everything. I'm sorry, I always get a bit emotional when I get to this part. I try not to cry, but, well, we'll see what happens. In that time, I was living in Santiago while my parents were living in the south with my two younger sisters. So I knew things were not going great, but I didn't really understand how hard the situation really was. So for me, it all changed like that, in one moment. From one day to the next, my naive little world just came crashing. From one moment to the next, I went from having all of my basic needs covered to not knowing if I was able to pay for food, for rent, or to continue to go to university. My family's life was never one of big luxuries. We never went to fancy trips to Europe. We never took cruises or anything like that. But my parents had always made sure that my four sisters and I had a safe place to come home to. They had given us love, education, healthcare, hobbies, and so many other things that I cannot even begin to cover in this talk. But it wasn't until that point of the bankruptcy that I truly understood what all of that meant. I became terrified of not being able to finish university. It was just so important for me to keep going to school. And the thing is, in Chile, education is really expensive. And even though many things have improved over the years, there's one thing that has not changed. If something happens, you can freeze your year, which means that you can stop going to school, but you still have to pay until the end of the year. So as you may imagine, for me, acquiring debt and not going to school did not look like a good option at all. So I spent the next years juggling multiple terrible jobs and being a full-time student. It was pretty exhausting, I must admit that. And I became so afraid about repeating the bankruptcy time that this fear began dominating all of my life. But there was this other force that was kind of taking half of my brain. I became obsessed with inequality and access to education because I saw that as the only way of building a future for yourself. But for a long time, fear prevailed. And the only thing that I wanted was to never be in that situation ever again. So all I wanted was a good job that would pay the bills so I could be happy and comfortable. So I finished my undergraduate, and I did just that. I found myself a job, and then another, and then another, all while I continued to study. I ended up working for this amazing engineering firm. And while I was there, and after much, much pain, delays, suffering, and lots of tears, you can just ask my thesis advisor on that one, I even managed to finish my master's. In that job, I had amazing opportunities. I got to go to Canada. I co-created and led a sustainability entrepreneurship initiative. I got to work in projects in Chile, in Argentina. I got to go to Peru to speak about our sustainability services. It was unbelievably amazing. In that job, I felt valued, intellectually challenged, and safe. In the meantime, I got married, we bought a house, and life was really, really good. But there were these two forces fighting each other inside of me. On one side, the crippling fear of going back to that experience of bankruptcy, and on the other hand, that fire that had ignited in me during my family's hardship, and eventually, the latter one. I decided to leave my safe and well-paid job, and I asked a friend for help to build sustainable schools in Chile. Another friend joined us, and we realized that we had a really, really big problem. Neither of us donated to anything. So if we didn't, how could we ask of anybody else to donate if we were just simply not willing to do so ourselves? The problem was that we did not trust that NGOs would use our money for the actual causes. So we decided that we needed to understand if this was a problem that was living in our heads or if this was an actual, real problem. So we set out to do some research about what was happening in aid. And it was then that we ran into statistics from the UN stating that 30% of all donations get lost to corruption. We found research from the World Economic Forum that shared that from the world's GDP, 5% is lost to corruption. We also read data from the UK stating that less than half of the Brits trusted NGOs. So there was at least half of another country that had the same distrust problem that we did. Crazy, right? It was then that we understood that if we wanted to actually make a change, we needed to go to the basis of the problem and make sure that no money was ever lost again. We looked at how corruption was measured, and we researched the World Transparency Perception Index and the World Governance Index, and both of them look at corruption from the expert opinion point of view and all after the fact. And we were like, hey, wait a minute. Nobody seems to be trying to stop corruption from happening in the first place. So it was then and there that in Light Aid, a project that was supposed to be construction from the first moment, morphed into Tech for Good. We decided that we were going to create a platform that would enable real-time transparency to the use of donations. That way, we could empower an infinite number of impact initiatives to run their projects transparently, and no money would need to ever get lost again. The guys and I ended up creating a web-based technology that allows you to see where, when, and on what donations are spent, all in real time. We released the first version of Enlighted in 2017, and we had the opportunity to work with small projects in Chile, Peru, Mexico, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Madagascar, and Norway. And go figure, we were able to prove that transparent projects could exist. Before I go, I want to share with you the words of one of the wisest women I know, my mother. And please don't tell her that I said this, because I will deny it. But I think the reason why I hated this when she said it to me as a teenager was because I always knew in secret that she was right. She said to me, "Los tontos aprenden solo de sus propias experiencias. Los inteligentes aprenden también de las de los demás." For those of you who do not speak Spanish, this means fools learn only from their experiences. Smart people learn from the experiences of others as well. I think at this point, it is pretty self-explanatory that I was a fool. You know already that I grew up surrounded by poverty, but that it took me going through a little piece of it to understand that we need to end it. I will never be able to say that I understand what it is to grow up in poverty, because I didn't. But that small sample that I got to go through was enough for me to understand that I will do absolutely everything in my power to make sure that younger generations do not have to go through poverty again. And in order to do that, we need to know, we need to have transparency and to make sure that no resources that were meant for good, that were meant to solve problems like poverty, are ever lost again. I want to invite you to be what my mom calls smart people, because neither of us needs to see Venice or Miami disappear underwater. We do not need to see anybody else die of hunger or a treatable disease. We do not need to see the last tree of the Amazonas fall or the last coral reef to die in order to understand that these things are important to protect. Now is the time. Today is the day in which each and every one of us has the chance to do something about it. So choose whatever matters the most to you and do something to protect it. And if you do not know where or how to begin, you can always join us at Enlighted. Thank you very much.